But if you have your Bibles, you turn to Luke 15. We're coming to one of the most well-known parables that Jesus has told. Can anybody guess? The Prodigal Son. Yes. This is such a great story. I actually want to take 2 weeks on it. And today we're going to look at the younger son. Next week we're going to look at the older son. It's going to be a lot of fun. But today we're looking at Luke 15, starting in verse 11. And so we read this. These are Jesus' words. And he said, "There was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me.' And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country, and there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I'll say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants.' And he arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate." All right. Every day we choose between 2 options. We can choose our life between 2 different ways to live. We can choose to live with the Father, and when we do that, we actually think it's amazing to be able to live moment by moment, every day, always in communication with God. And I remember that my main identity is that I'm a son of God, or if you're a girl, you're a daughter of God. I remember that I'm perfectly safe in God's hands, so I'm not easily discouraged. And when problems and challenges come up, and they will, I always have the Holy Spirit to be able to have my back. That's what it's like to live with the Father. I can choose to live at home with the Father, and that's God's desire for us. But then there's another way, and I'm going to use the language that the text is actually using. Instead of living with the Father, we can actually go and live in a far country. We can go live in a far country and live away from the Father. And when I do that, I don't think much about God, because when I do, it starts making me feel kind of guilty because I'm doing things I shouldn't be doing. I don't want to think about God. I don't have this sense of freedom. I feel weighed down because I'm kind of living on my own strength, and I'm not living on God's strength. I feel hurried. I feel easily irritated. I feel easily threatened. I actually try to live my life with little bursts of pleasure because I don't actually have the sustainable joy from living with the Father. That's what it's like to live in a far country. And you and I can make this choice, and we make it at some time or another. So Jesus tells this story about a boy who chose to leave home. And this boy actually goes across a number of crossroads in this story. And what I want to do with this talk is kind of go through 4 different stages or 4 different crossroads that this prodigal son goes through, and consider each of them for us. The first stage is actually something that happens before the story even begins. And so the first stage is the temptation stage. One day a thought just entered this boy's mind that living at home is a burden. That he didn't want to live at home anymore. I'd be happy away from the Father. I would be happier without all these limitations in my life. And we see this in children sometimes. We like to have our kids, actually our children, we have compliant children who love to stay at home. Anybody know of any non-compliant kids? Yeah, don't look at them right now. Just, do you know of any of them? All right. There's a story about a strong-willed 2-year-old boy named Frankie. And Frankie, one day his mother saw him pull up a chair and take it over to the living room window and push it gently behind the drapes. And she was curious about what he was doing, so she just kind of snuck up behind little Frankie and listened to what he was saying. And in a sober voice, he was saying, "I gotta get out of here." And that's exactly what the prodigal son is saying. I gotta get out of here. Like, I gotta get out of here. Here at home, I always do what the Father says. I've got to eat with him. I gotta go to work with him. I gotta follow his rules. I don't want this. My life would be far easier if I kind of did my own thing. I want to be ruler of my own roost. I want to say what I want to say and do what I want to do, and I don't want to be at home anymore. I got to get out of here. And I guarantee Satan will plant these thoughts in your mind. And it'll happen, every one of us at some point or another. I'd be happier if I went away, because if I really am honest with myself, I don't truly believe that living with the Father will be in my best interest. I won't have as much fun. I won't enjoy I'll be missing out. Some of you are having thoughts like that now. Some of you are tempted to enter into a relationship you know will not be honoring to God, but it feels good and it's going to make you feel good and it's going to make you feel happiness and pleasure, so you want to leave home. You know, some of you are tired of being faithful in a task or being faithful in a ministry or being faithful as a parent or being faithful as a son or a daughter. You feel like it would just be easier to just run away and you'd be happier if you didn't live at home. The prodigal son says, my life would be better if I could just get out of here. But then there's what he never does. He never really looks at, and I think we all understand this, he never looks at the consequences. He doesn't think it through. He never thinks about, wow, I'm going to be cut off from home, away from the Father, alone and unloved. He doesn't think about that. If you're entertaining temptations right now, think of all the things that you would be giving up. Think of the consequences. If you're unfaithful in your relationships, if you're bailing in your ministry responsibility, if you're sacrificing your financial integrity, don't think you'll get to the end of your life without a pile of regret. You'll have a huge amount of regret. God will not be mocked. Don't think you can cheat God. Some of you are considering taking steps right now that if you take them, it'll lead you down a road to a lot of pain and misery. You should take that. Everything in your future rests right now on whether you're willing to do the hard work and go through and think about the consequences. Think about it. If you do, you'll be spared a lot of suffering. The prodigal son in this story that Jesus tells, he doesn't do that. He harbors these thoughts for we don't know how long. He can't keep toying with this whole idea of sin forever. When you think about sin, you're going to actually do something that is going to be irresistible. If you trust that the Father really has the best life in store for you, this next step you can't help but take. Look at verse 12. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me. Now, this is a step that could be called the action step. This is the action stage. This is a huge stage. He's crossed the border from thinking about it to actually putting it in motion. He's actually doing it. And he's convinced himself that he has a right to his father's stuff, even though ethically and actually legally, it's all still his dad's. But he thinks he has the right to it all. By the way, if you're thinking about sin, if you're thinking about a certain sin in your life long enough, you're eventually going to act on it. And let me tell you exactly when that's going to happen, when you're going to act on it. You ready? It's when you have rationalized being able to do it. The moment you can rationalize doing something that you know is wrong, that's when you're going to do it. And this starts at an early age. When I was growing up, my mom had this glass, I think it was made out of crystal actually, this bell. It looked a lot like this. And it was beautiful. And she prized this bell. And she told my sister and I, hey, you guys need to not play around this bell. In fact, the rule in our house was don't touch the bell. Don't use the bell. Don't look at the bell. Don't think about the bell. So one time she is, gone somewhere and we have a babysitter and I'm like 8 or 9 years old and we actually had a couple friends over and we're playing and we wanted to play school. And so one of my friends, I'm not sure if I remember exactly who, I think it was my sister because it would be something that she would do. And she said something like, Adam, why don't you use the bell if you're going to be the teacher? And I'm like, no, we can't use the bell. That's the number one rule. We cannot use the bell. Well, it's for education. Mom and Dad are for education. And I'm like, you know what? You're right. This is all for education. So I picked up the bell and I rang it. And would you believe the first ring, I dropped the bell and it shattered on the floor. And I was dead. I was dead. My mom got home and continued my education. She didn't give me the robe to wear. She didn't give me the ring. She didn't give me shoes to wear like in the Prodigal Son. The only thing that died was me. The fatted calf was still alive. And I learned something really important about the rationalizing of somebody else's stuff. Violating something that shouldn't be violated. Some of you are in this room, and I'm going to get really serious here. This happens to adults. Some of you in this room have crossed the border from contemplating sin to action. You've had inappropriate conversations with somebody you're not married to. Or you've already begun to pad your expense account and you're not being honest. You're not being ethical. Some of you are engaged in addictive patterns and behavior. There's a pattern of maybe lying going on where you're avoiding trouble. The reason this goes on is that you're telling yourself, it's not so bad. I mean, it's better than these people. And you're telling yourself stuff like, wow, I'm doing this because she or he did that. See how that rationalizes and you don't take ownership? I've heard this too. Oh, well, you can't survive in this world without doing this. And we rationalize. My question to you is, will you honestly face the things that you do and stop rationalizing them? Now, I want you to understand something. The son doesn't do this. He says, I want to have my inheritance and I want to leave now. That's what he says to the father. Understand this isn't a story about a young guy who's just wanting what's his and going off to discover himself and find himself. No, this isn't what's going on. Historians actually say that this request from the son would have been such a slap in the face to the father. In fact, if a son would ever ask something like that of the father, they would get punished. They might get beaten. They might even get banished from the village. It would never happen. To choose sin, to live in a far-off country is in effect to say to the father, I wish to live as if you were dead, Dad. As if you didn't exist. That's what the son is actually saying to the father in this story. And in many ways, the most amazing part of this story is the way the father responds. The son says to the father, hey, I want my inheritance and I want to leave. The father doesn't do what Jesus' listeners would really understand for him to actually do. Jesus' listeners would expect him to, well, man, they need to slap that kid across the side of the head. In all seriousness, they need to beat that kid. Or they need to banish him from the village. That is a reflection on the entire village. We will not be a part of that. But the father doesn't do that. The father takes what is rightfully his own and gives it to his kid. He takes that which he could retire on and he's supposed to live on someday, as he's not dead, and he gives it to his kid. He gives it to his child. Unheard of. Jesus' listeners in this part of the story can't comprehend it. And this is where you and I kind of glean through the story and we kind of move on. But we need to kind of look at this through new ears here. Not only does the father not have to do this, no normal father would act this way. Nobody would ever have done this. They never would have heard a son asking a request. They never would have dreamt of a father responding the way the father did in Jesus' story. The father actually allows the son to leave. It's part of what's amazing about this story. There are other great stories in this chapter of Luke 15. There's a story of the lost coin. There's the story of the lost sheep. And in both of those stories, to Jesus' listeners, they would be thinking, well, I would actually just be doing those things anyway. You know, I would be searching for the lost coin. I would be searching for the lost sheep. But here, this is unthinkable the way the father is reacting to the son. Like it's not even comprehending to them. Like this doesn't make any sense. Here we find a love of a different kind. And here's a God who gives freedom to his children even though it causes him a lot of pain. Even though it causes him a lot of hurt. Why? Because he wants so deeply to have a relationship with you, his children. The son disregards his father. He disregards all of his obligations. He disregards all of the gratitude that he should have toward his father and all the things that his father is building for him. And he says, I want to live as if you're dead. And he moves to a far country. Then in verse 13, look what happens. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country. And there he squandered his property in reckless living. He convinces himself that it's okay to do this. And he doesn't take any time at all to do it. I mean, he doesn't waste any time. It says, not many days later, and he turns this temptation into action. And we do this all the time. When we're moving into sin, we usually don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. Why? Because all of our sin is based on a lie. And so it's very easy for us to move quickly into it. We can't comprehend it too much. We got to just do it. Sin's always in a hurry. The son knows that he'll be rejected by the whole village for what he does. So in a few days, he takes off. He travels to a far country. He squanders his property with reckless living. And then he hits the next stage. Look at verse 14. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. This next stage is what I like to call the pain stage. It's the stage of pain. If you live in a far country long enough, sooner or later, you're going to feel the pain. Physical pain, emotional pain, spiritual pain. It's going to cost you more than you ever thought it could cost you. The son was alone. The son was desperate. He had no hope. And the question was, how's he going to respond to pain? How's he going to respond to pain? What's he going to do when his life hits the wall? It's a major crossroad in our spiritual life. What are you going to do when you hit pain? This young guy not only hits a wall of pain, he no longer has a way to avoid facing the pain. He has no more money. He has no more parties. He has no more distractions. Now he's just got to face the pain. In order to survive, he's going to have to take care of a bunch of pigs. Now, who doesn't like bacon? Come on. But pigs back then, they were considered very dirty, very unclean, which they are. But, you know, a Jewish person would never consider even eating bacon. They would never eat anything from the pig. It was unclean. And he was considered a pig herder, which was a despised job. If anybody found out that he herded pigs, he would be heaped with shame. And he would bring shame to his village. It was a big deal. This kid knows ultimate pain, but then Jesus says in verse 17 that in his pain, he came to himself. In other words, he finally hit reality. He realized what's going on in his life. Some of us in this room have areas of pain where God wants to do work in us. You know, maybe you know the pain of feeling unfulfilled in your life. Maybe you know the pain of living to please other people all the time and it doesn't feel so good and you feel hollow inside. Maybe you're at pain right now because there's guilt or sin that you've never really dealt with. And there's this choice that you're facing right now. You know, you can either mask the pain or you can face it. How do we mask pain? Well, anybody got a remote? Turn the TV on? Or get our wallets out? How much money we got? I got to go shopping. Got to go buy something. Or I'm gonna just get my nose down into my work and I'm not going to think about anything else and just focus on work. Which sounds good, but you're avoiding your pain. So you can do that. A lot of people do that. A lot of people in this room are doing that. I've been known to do that. Or we can face the pain. We can courageously face pain in our life every day. We can acknowledge, God, I am in this situation because of something I have done, and I'm in a lot of pain. And I'm going to go through this pain, and I'm going to learn something through this pain. And with your help, God, I'm going to quit running away from, and going off into a far country and living far from you. I will deal with my pain directly. I will spend time alone reflecting on what's going on in my life. So we're here in this third stage. The young man faces the most pain that he ever has, and he comes to himself and he faces up to the truth. And he wouldn't have been able to face up to the truth without going through the pain. And then Jesus says that he composes this little speech. Anybody ever done that? Everybody had like a really important conversation that you got to have, or you've got like a job interview coming up, or you're about to ask somebody out on a date and you're in the car and you're just like, you're going through a little conversation, a little speech that you're going to give. That's what he's doing right here. He's coming up with this little speech. In verse 18, he says, I will arise and go to my father. And then he composes this little speech. And I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. So he's in pain. He decides to go back. And he doesn't see how he can fully be at home, just being a son and a dad. But, he can comprehend the idea of maybe working for dad. As a hired servant, he could be different than being a son. And he could wrap his mind around that. He'd actually, okay, let me think of the silver lining of being a servant, a hired servant. I could have, my autonomy. I could live in the village somewhere. I could actually make an income. Maybe I could even start saving up my money and I can start paying off the debt that I owe my father. Maybe I can win back my graces by doing that if I do it enough. But the bottom line is I won't have that emotional relationship with dad anymore. I can't be considered a son. I won't have the intimacy of a son and a father. And this fourth stage, this final choice is, will you live as the hired servant or as the child of God? Will you live as a hired servant or as a child of God? And I kind of wonder how many people here, if you're really honest with yourself, would say, I don't know what it's like to really be a child of God. I've always kind of been in service mode to God. I've kind of acted like a hired servant to God. It's what I'm supposed to do. It's what I was taught to do since Sunday school. But to have like this intimate relationship, I'm not sure I'm there. This desperate, starving boy makes the long journey back to the village, totally defeated, totally crushed. You can picture him, he's just emaciated, he's starving. And he just wants to get back home. And with every step closer to the village, he thinks about what it's going to be like when he gets there. He knows that he's going to face hostility. He knows he's sure he's going to face public humiliation, not just from his father, but also from his father's household, but also from the entire village. This is what the boy is expecting. And he reaches the outskirts of the village, and word spreads from one home to another because everybody would know what this story is all about. Oh, look, there's the prodigal son. Wow, he looks a little thinner. Squandered all his dad's money. Man, and they just shake their head, right? There's something you ought to know. What that meant was that money from the lands that belonged to the father that actually went to a far country, the Gentiles, to Jesus' listeners, that was a big no-no. In fact, they had a ceremony for that. Land was such a precious thing to the Israelites. If an Israelite lost money and it was given to the Gentiles, or lost land and given to the Gentiles, there was an actual ceremony where that Israelite would be kicked out from the village. And the son knew this, and Jesus' listeners knew this, and in Jesus' story, the father knew this. He knew this was going to happen. The father knows this will happen, and if his son comes back, he's thinking, as soon as he comes into the village, my kid's going to be mocked, my kid's going to be taunted, he might even be physically beaten. It's going to be a huge problem. And so the son comes strolling into the village, and the people are gathered for this very moment in the story. And Jesus says in verse 20, he says, while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion. And then one of the most wonderful phrases in all of Scripture, Jesus says about this father, and he ran. A Middle Eastern nobleman with flowing robes, you'd never catch him running. You know, that just wouldn't be very noble to run. The great philosopher Aristotle, he actually quoted this. He says, "Great men never run. Great men are run to. Great men never run. They walk slowly. They walk slowly like kings. They walk slowly like popes. You never see people like that running. People run to them. You know who run? Children run. You know who run? Those who are desperate. Those people run. Those who are needy. Those people who don't have any honor or they're too eager. Those people who are afraid. Those people run. And my friends, here we see Jesus is saying this is the heart of God. That this Father's heart is so full that he forgets everything. All he sees is his boy who's starving and in trouble and desperately needing help. And so he runs. And then for what happens next, there's no words. In his story, Jesus says that he throws open his arms for his son that he thought he had lost forever and ever. He sees the face that was once the face of this little boy when he was born. Now it's gaunt and it's starving. And he just hugs him. In Jesus' story, it says that he starts kissing his son, and the word that's used for kissing is a word that kind of means he's kissing and he's keeping on kissing. He just gives his son kiss after kiss after kiss. He doesn't care what anybody else thinks. Whoever you are, whatever you've been, that's the heart of God for you. No matter what you've done, that's the heart of God for you. No words, just holds on to you and kisses you repeatedly. Tears running down his face. So happy to see you again. If you just turn to him, he wants you to be his beloved daughter. He wants you to be his son. Just turn to him. He longs to run to you and throw his arms around you. He wants to kiss you over and over again. That's the heart of the God who Jesus came to proclaim. And then finally, the Son speaks. And I want to ask you to really look closely at what the Son is saying, because it's a little bit different than what he said in the beginning when he was practicing his speech. Verse 21, and the Son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. What's missing? And there's no talk of hired servant there. Now, some people would say, oh, well, it's because the dad interrupted him before he was finished. Could be. Text doesn't say, but here's what I think. I think it's more likely that the son was just shattered by seeing the unimaginable reaction his father had for him. I think the son had anticipated 1,000 different things happening upon his return and never anticipated what he experienced. He never anticipated being treated like a hero, never anticipated coming home with seeing his dad running to him and tears running down his face and being just bear hugged and kissed all over the place. The son sees his father maybe as if for the first time, and he sees that it wasn't about the money ever. It was always about this relationship that his dad desperately wanted to have with him. It was the heart of a father that he'd nearly broken. And you guys, it's the same for you and me. The son realizes that he can't earn his way back. It's not his job to devise a plan to be able to pay back what he owes the father. To think he could actually provide full compensation and fix everything for his father, that's not in the cards. That would be an insult. His homecoming, if it were to ever happen at all, would be a sheer gift of grace. I think the son realized in that moment, with his father's arms wrapped around him, kissing him all over, he doesn't want to be away from home anymore. He wants to live at home with his father. The son gives up this little plan to save himself. He gives up the last of his pride. He totally surrenders everything for this overwhelming love for dad. The father wants everyone to know that his son is fully restored. And so in Jesus' story, what does the father do? He gives him this robe, which is a symbol of, hey, I'm going to treat you like royalty. I'm going to treat you like a king of honor. Gives his son a ring, which is a sign of significance and status. Gives his son shoes, which actually is a mark of a free man, not a slave. And he says, let's put on a big party. Let's celebrate my son coming back. Listen, whatever you've done, it doesn't matter. Whatever you've done, however bad it seems to you, if you just turn, the Father longs to just run to you and to have a relationship with you and wrap his loving arms around you and cry tears of joy at your return. He wants to kiss your face. Just imagine God wanting to kiss your face. Your broken, sinful, ugly, selfish, prideful, angry face. Muddled with mud from the pig pen. Kissing you all over. Maybe you're aware today that you've been playing around with temptation for a while. And you're just on the cusp of rationalizing, making that a plan into action. Maybe you've already taken steps from the Father. Maybe there's a pattern of sin going on in your life. Maybe you need to acknowledge this to God and just say, God, I understand that I'm doing this. It's happening over and over again. I'm in this cycle of doing it and asking for forgiveness, doing it again, feeling bad, asking for forgiveness, doing it again. And God, I got to stop the cycle. But I don't have the strength to do it. And I just surrender my will to you. Maybe you've been living for a while like a hired servant. It's time to acknowledge that and embrace God as a son or a daughter and just know the love of God.